This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have John Fisher on the show, and he's a leader over at C2D, Coaching, Counseling, and Development. We're going to talk about soft skills. We're talking about change management, coaching people, building people up, and all the good stuff that comes in between. Anyway, with all that being said, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, John. Lovely to be here. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, me too. Just so we have some context for the conversation for those listeners out there, if you don't mind, just tell us a little about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Yep, certainly. Thank you. A bit of a peculiar background in many ways. Started life when I left school in the Royal Air Force, working on aircraft radar systems on mainly fast jets, and then worked on some radio systems and worked on aircraft simulators in the main. And working on aircraft simulators, I learned Fortran and Coral, which was a language that my sister always got confused with COBOL, and kept putting on my CV when she used to write it that I could speak COBOL, and I kept having to tell her, no, it's Coral. And interestingly, I've always found the Fortran if-thens a really useful technique through the rest of life, and used it in problem solving, used it in some of the thinking, and used it in some of the hypothetical projections from past experiences. If I'd have done that, then this might have happened, and which would be better. So I really like the discipline Fortran gave me. Then moved into project management after that, and again the discipline, I think that project management with the whole concept of Gantt charts back in my day, flow lanes more modernly, and some of the waterfall type concepts that are coming out have been really useful as well in helping that structure and framework. And then moved into internal consultancy, designing, delivering, awareness-raising education and training that led to a training partner role that basically led to the counselling first, and then coaching and leadership and development as part of parcel as to where I am now for the last 20-odd years.
So when it comes to like coaching and how do people find you and want to get your help and services? And how do they know? I know for me, like sometimes it's hard to know that you need help. You know, it's hard to get that self-awareness to understand that I do need someone. And it's really hard to even ask for that when you're struggling, you know? I think back to my first time being a manager, and, you know, I didn't really know to even ask for help until I had two people quit on the same day. And then that's when it like hit me like, you know, I had a mentor that was assigned to me by the company, and I was talking to him, and I told him, and I was making excuses about, you know, well, the banks, you know, in Charlotte are paying higher than we are right now, and that's why they're leaving. And, you know, and he gave me this whole story about, nope, that's not it at all. It's because you're a bad boss. Like, that's why they're leaving. And that's what it took for me to realize that I needed some coaching and some help. What does it take for people that, you know, come to you?
Sadly, sometimes that, John. And there's a quote I use regularly on the training, and any leadership training I do, I put quotes on the wall or little diagrams and pictures to appeal to those who like that type of information. And the quote is, leadership is what you lack when I don't know what to do. And I just love that because it resonates so much with me and where I've been stuck when I haven't quite had that framework and boundaries. And a lot of people don't know they need it or don't know where to ask and where to find the information. On me, maybe it's a little bit easier than that. In my website is quite simply c2d.co.uk. So the letter C, the number 2, the letter D. Because a bit like Winnie the Pooh, I like things to be simple, bear of simple brains. So they find me there, and I get people find me through the website. I am a constructivist psychologist by inclination and follow a lot of the principles of a guy called George Kelly, an American psychologist working in academia in mainly the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, who came up with personal construct psychology that's around the individual and understanding everybody's a unique individual and seeing it from their perspective. So people know me through that. People know me through the change curve. And I've had instances where people have recommended friends and family members to speak to me. And one instance really taps into part of the problem you were just talking about. Saw one person who had seen another member of their family, and they recommended me speak to a third member of their family who'd been going through what I think was PTSD, listening to the person I'd been seeing talk about it, and spoke to that colleague, spoke to their family member once, and think there's something, but they just weren't ready to address it, and were where you were at, making excuses, in denial, really, from that. So, and sometimes from my point of view, you've just got to let people wait until the mistake happens, sadly, or until they realise they've got to reach out to somebody. And one of the other peculiarities is that you can be a notch on their sort of walking stick or something like that, where they see you for a short period of time and then stop when it gets too scary, and then go and see somebody else, stop when it gets scary. And I've had that where I've just been somebody in a chain of coaches or counsellors that they've seen when the time's been right for them. And sometimes with some people, they just don't fit. They're not the right people for you to see at all. So it's a wide variety of ways. Some have come to me because they've been on one of my training courses, or they've seen me on some of the talks I've done for various organisations as well. I think maybe just to go a little sideways to your question, I created a change curve some years ago that was around people coming for a counselling session, going away motivated, and then not coming back for the second session. And I started thinking about the implications of that, and started to recognise that people didn't come back because the price of changing was higher than the price of staying for them at that moment in time. So the change curve came out of that. I don't want to change, or I'm being forced through change, and the impact on people's sense of self-identity and then the negative associated with that.
So tell me a little bit about that change curve and, how you kind of came up with it.
Yeah, well, it was literally, I started noticing people were making appointments and not turning up the following week. Sorry.
They were just cancelling the appointments or just not showing up?
They weren't even cancelling. They were just not turning up. And it was a charity I was counselling for, so I was a volunteer. And I thought at first it was just me being rubbish. As you do, you usually blame yourself, don't you, right, first also. But then I started to realise that a lot of my colleagues had the same issues and problems. I think it came to a head one day when I was in the waiting room, chatting. Some people had come for a family support group who somebody else was facilitating while I was waiting for my counsellee to turn up, and this person started talking to me, and they said, "Oh, yep, you saw my sister, and she thought you were really great, really helped her a lot. She was really pleased," type of comments. And I'm stood there smiling, going, "Oh, great, thank you. How's she doing now?" type of responses, all the while thinking, so why did she not come back for a second time then, And that really started the ball rolling. And so it's about our feelings of fear, threat, anxiety, as we start realising the scale and scope of the impact of the change and the implications for us as people. So I took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the bereavement curve lady's concept of the sine wave, and started mapping on some stages that we potentially go through, not necessarily linear and not necessarily every one, leading down into a sort of trough of despair, an area of confusion, whereby we don't really know what to do anymore. We don't trust ourselves. We blame ourselves for being in this position of unable to move, unable to do anything right, because we should have known better. I thought I was a good leader. I'm a good guy. So why am I not leading well? Why are they not responding? Mm-hmm. And part of it's around the horses for courses concept. So you've got to have the right approach with the person rather than a sheep dip or a one-size-fits-all approach to everybody. And I also added in a couple of routes off the curve. So there's one where you start making it work, you start taking small actions, you start doing things. In your case, the relevance might be talking to your mentor, who then started helping you find the way through it and find what to do. A couple of other ways are low energy investment, just denial, just refusing to accept and doing nothing, or a very high energy negative exit, which is hostility in the concept of I'll actively try and prove you wrong for making me change, and I'll do everything I can to show you're an idiot to do this and force this on me. And then I added another one based on personal experience and experience of watching and listening to other people, which I used to euphemistically call sod it, I'm off, which is where I leave. I either mentally or physically leave the organisation because I recognise my values are so fundamentally different from the organisation's, and I'm not prepared to allow myself to go through that and to put through that. So, and I've left a couple of organisations because I've not been comfortable with where they're heading and the values that they held, the toxic environment being a classic example of that one. So added that one in, and people seem to resonate with it. It seems to fit into a lot of people in how they feel and how they see things. And of course, when you're using it in coaching or counselling, it's a brilliant visual image that they can resonate with. And I've put rope on the floor and have people walk through the curve, stand on one side, visualise what the other side looks like, and then walk across to it and think about what actions they took, how did that feel, and use it just to help ground with people going through that change, that experience.
So when it comes to like going through a change, whether it's, getting help with bad leadership, or maybe you have an addiction that you're getting past, or depression that you're, working through, it sounds like there's this up and down kind of path that you're going to go across that, involves, maybe sometimes self-doubt, blaming yourself, taking on the identity of a failure or a bad leader or a someone that's bad with money or whatever it is, and owning that as an identity. And then you have to kind of get past that and get through that. And that change, you said earlier, the price of change is high.
Yeah.
What can we do to help?
Really nice example. Sorry, John.
Yeah,
That's a really nice interpretation, certainly of the downward slope where you're going in towards that, where you're right at the bottom and that trough of despair. A nice example of that. And the organisation I was a volunteer counsellor for was actually an alcohol abuse organisation. So I was seeing a lot of people at the time with a dependency, and I'd done some work with both drink and drug addiction as helping people in there. So it quite a pertinent example. And people with a dependency of some form usually have to change their whole life. They've got to change the circle of friends they've got who tend to empower them or collude with them. They've got to change their habits, their routines, and everything like that as part and parcel of moving forwards and find a new path. So to answer the question that I misjudged the timeline and got slightly on top of you, one of the things I think that really helps is that what if type of, or how could you? So that looking at the past and then reflecting that onto the future and thinking about what it could be and almost creating a new identity for yourself and then trying out and acting as if that identity was you and playing with that for a while. And what that does for me is something similar to in training courses, the awful expression role play, which I hate that expression because I don't like real play either. I've got to say that some people try to just use a little twist in language. But for me, it's about practicing the tools and techniques and being able to make mistakes, being able to try them for size, because part of my sort of underpinning philosophy is that Kellyan concept of trying it out, testing it. We're always constantly experimenting with our future. So Kelly talked about we approach the future based on our past experiences and acting as if they were true. And then the next time the last one goes into, and it just forms a large melting pot of experience that helps give us some sort of focus and gives us some direction of travel. And as you know yourself from your learning curve back as a new leader, once you get that idea of the travel and the direction, you can really pick up speed and go because you can start integrating bits of it and building on them as you develop and that pans out. And I've had similar experiences when I first got my leadership roles in I tend to over empower whether they're ready for it or not and give people far too much. And I used to expect them to come back to me if they had a question, and some did and some didn't. And those that didn't really created problems in some of the teams that I was with. So I've had similar learning curves. And I think having a mentor is fundamental for anybody, either a mentor or a coach. Mm-hmm. And a mentor will help you plan your future. A coach will help you plan today. And a counsellor will help you get rid of yesterday, as a very crude timeline for the difference between counselling, coaching and mentoring. So having that network of trusted people and actually just looking at yourself and recognising and taking the really brave step to ask somebody, why has this gone wrong? Why have they left me? And the old idiom that when you're pointing a finger at somebody, three are pointing back at you. Yeah, it's a really powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, thinking about that, you talked about, addiction, and I feel like a lot of people struggle with addiction, whether it's substance abuse or it's addiction to power or it's addiction to being right or to having meetings sometimes, on a business standpoint. There are some people that are addicted to sending emails that are way too long.
Yeah.
And no matter
I've
what
worked
that
for
is,
people like that. Yeah.
it seems like we all have to go through some type of change to improve ourselves if we want to improve. And I think one of the hard things is determining, whether or not you really want to improve. And, how do we, get past that part of like, it's hard. I don't want to do this. Maybe it's working out. I know I need to work out, but and when I was running, it was always that first mile that was the hardest. It was putting on your shoes that was the hardest part of it, getting ready to go. How do we get past that first step of change?
Well, brutally honestly, sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
Some people are just not ready through whatever it is, that they're just not ready for that. And we see a lot of people just living in a repeat cycle. And it's the classic, they've had 1 year's experience 10 times rather than 10 years experience. Some of the ways around that are helping them reflect back, helping them find a different way through it. So getting them to reflect, getting them to look at what successful people have done and how other people have done things and what they've done to get round it, and then getting them to look at how they could do something similar rather than the same thing because they're a different person to the other person. Sometimes it's that they literally have to hit rock bottom and then you can start working with them. And occasionally have had really blinding road to Damascus type of breakthroughs with people. I was seeing one person for alcohol issues, and I had a series of cards with different situations on them, some that reflected their lifestyle and some that reflected a healthier, more positive lifestyle. And I got them comparing three of those cards with each other, saying what was similar and different about them effectively. And they looked at one trio of cards and suddenly realised that when they were with one specific person, they didn't have a problem. Right. When they were in the other two cards and social places, that's where the problem lay. And they were going into, I'll use a sporting analogy, they were going into the locker room and suddenly dropping into that testosterone fuel locker room mentality that was hard drinking, hard living with those other two groups of people, and the other person they weren't. And when they came back for the next session, that actually started changing their life, moving away from some of those groups that were bad for them and looking at how to mitigate one of the other groups that they wanted to remain in, how to mitigate that. And I think it was the second or third session that we'd had that card sort exercise or that comparison. And the next session was the last one that they needed. And it was just a tidy up session. So that's other ways you can do it, looking at who can they depend on. And some of these are techniques that things like AA use with their mentor scheme, their buddy scheme, in a work environment. Something that only happened a lot later in my working life to me, and I then employed as well the allocation of a buddy in the team that you're joining, somebody to help and to support them, to go there to answer questions. Needs to be chosen carefully, the buddy, as to not just anybody, but somebody who will fit potentially that person. And I'd say getting multiple mentors. So have 2 or 3 different mentors for different aspects of life and career, and try to get mentors outside your career trajectory that can give you a different viewpoint. Because one of the problems that appears to happen is people feel they're the only person with that issue problem and get very tunnel vision and can't see the whole area. So I came across a quote from the French philosopher Foucault years ago that's now the footer from my emails, as you may have noticed. It's my job is to make windows where there was once walls. And I just love that quote because for me, that sums up my role as a facilitator, as a coach, as a counsellor. It's to help them see a different perspective, see a different way forwards, and to see how they can get through and past whatever the blocks are. I've also done hypnotherapy training, so I do use hypnotherapy or light trance as a way of helping people see a better perspective on things.
I definitely want to talk about that in just a second. Going back to mentors in other fields, just happened to be, and you probably don't even know this, but my mentor was actually in sales, which was shocking because I was in software development. He was in sales, and we got paired up at this leadership thing. We had our company did a leadership thing. They told us all to email some of the EVPs and ask them to help you. And I emailed like several. And the only one that replied back to me was this guy, Greg, who was in sales. And he writes me back, says, "Sure, I'd love to be your mentor." He's like, "I don't know anything about software, but maybe we can both learn, you know?" And he offered me a different perspective on everything that I knew about leadership, about management, about business opportunities, about the way that the rest of the business saw software and IT, you know, and that was very helpful for me to learn about how I needed to present my team to the rest of the business and how I needed to listen to the rest of the business on areas that I wasn't. So having a mentor in a different area is so valuable that I think so many people, they think, oh, I want to find a mentor who's where I want to be. No, find a mentor who's, you know, somewhere different that can, you know, looking at where you want to be.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And I think that's a really great example because salespeople tend to have a very different approach and outlook to software designers who tend to be very structured, very focused, very linear in thinking, linear in processing. And think about the flow charts I used to have to write in there that give you that whole structure, whereas salespeople tend to be a lot more, I will say, off the wall, a lot more bouncing between topics and a lot more from a software developer designer's point of view, potentially a lot more of a cowboy. The salesperson may see the software developers as your typical geek and get a life. You're just hidden behind a keyboard, etc. So I think that is really what's best about the mentor relationship, is that you both learn off each other and you both then moderate and come together in ways that help everybody and create a firmer foundation for future success. When I worked for a massive multinational as the internal consultant deploying change in the organisation, I was on the change team. And one of the things that company did, though, was when they went out, they were a multinational manufacturing organisation. When they went out to do some best practice observations, they went to companies like DHL to look at how did they transport goods across the world. They didn't go back to other manufacturing organisations. They went to people who were top of the game in a specific silo that they also did. So they went to companies that I suppose nowadays it would be the Amazons of this world to look at how they manage stores and how their stores operate to then release the items of equipment. So never bench practice your competitors, always bench practicing best in field. Yeah. I had the really bad, difficult job one time of that best practice of going and interviewing somebody who worked for Guinness, the brewery. It was really tragic, a dirty job, but somebody had to do it.
So tell me a little bit about this hypnotherapy and how that works exactly, because I've never experienced it, so I'm just curious what that's like.
Yeah, and I suppose the first thing to say is it's nothing like the stage hypnotist.
So it's not like the comedy shows.
No, nothing like that at all.
I've seen those before.
Yeah. You don't go to the strip if you want hypnotherapy. Um, so it's about two or three different things for me. It's about helping people re-look at something from a relaxed, more open perspective that allows them to put it into relation with the situation at the time, the person they are now, because a lot of people have a bad experience and still act as if that bad experience is true 10, 15, 20 years later when they've changed, the world has changed, and they still keep doing that same resistance. It can also help in a way of letting people in a relaxed way work through some of the issues, work through some of the solutions, sort of create the images, the visualization of doing it. But the way it works is it bypasses the sort of critical filter. I can't do that. That's not me. And part of our brain works in a way to protect ourselves. So if your brain realizes, your subconscious realizes that you're scared of something or you don't want something to happen, it will avoid those situations for you and keep you out of them so you don't feel threatened. So it doesn't allow you, in a way, to succeed because it's trying to do you a favour by keeping you where you are. And interestingly, that's also a common social phenomenon, is if you try to change, some people who like the way you were will do their best to keep you in that box you were in and make sure you don't change. And a lot of people will, which is why people have to change their environment sometimes, a lot of people will try and make you carry on doing what you always did because they feel comfortable, not because it's good for you, but because it's good for them.
Is that a fear of change? Like they're afraid of what you may become? Yeah. They're afraid of hurting this relationship between you?
Yeah. It's hurting the relationship. It's also some people have you in their lives for themselves. So you're the person they can look down on psychologically to make themselves feel better. And so they keep you there because they feel they're better than you, and that makes them feel good. And I suppose that the most obvious analogy to that is the Mean Girl syndrome, where they pick on and ostracize somebody because they're afraid of them, because they're different, and that difference scares them. And in the UK, I'm old enough to have lived through the punk era, and you saw that fear of anarchy if the punks got what they were, because they were outrageously dressed and everything, and became figures that scared normal, whatever normal means, people in who were so outlandish that you didn't know what they were going to do. So it's that type of environment that hypnotherapy can help you overcome. It can bypass that negative blockage filter that then helps you get to the root cause and helps you work through it to see a better outcome. I've also used a guy called Tad James, who came up with timeline therapy. So I regularly use timelining in my work, which is just getting people to visualize themselves in 3, 5, whatever's appropriate years' time. Usually try and get them to do it on the other side of a room, and then walk into that new person, feel what it's like, look at that journey, what do they think happened, what were the key points along that journey, and then come back and we talk about what learning did they get, how did it feel. So I get them to imagine how the future them is dressed, how they're stood, what sort of clothes they're wearing, and what, if any, environment are they in. That has been really powerful. A recent coachee that I had, the first session with them, they were a bit unfocused, didn't know what to do. They were just doing part-time bar work a few nights and then staying in the bar till all the hours, partying and everything. And the first session I did the timelining with them, got them to walk across the room, and I said, so how were they dressed? And the first thing they said was they had a lanyard on. And that having a lanyard became a key focal point for working with this person to get a job with a lanyard. And we set a year goal, and they got the job with a lanyard within 6 months from doing it. Other things helped, and other people helped in there, but that became something we could focus on and use as a nail or a stake in the ground to help them achieve what they wanted to achieve.
So when someone does figure out what they want to achieve and they get to that point where they can visualize, 5 years into the future or whatever, and see the new them that they want to be, what kind of encouragement do you give them along the way to start? Because sometimes I've heard people say, think about what that new person would be doing and try to do that. I've heard people say things like, start small with some of the small things. Like if you want to be a healthy person and you want to work out and be fit, let's say you don't have an hour to work out, but do you have 5 minutes? Start doing 5-minute workouts and then build that up over time. Is that the path that typically works for people?
That's the path that works really well, those paths, yeah. And as a part of the first one you talked about trying what somebody else does, that's part of what I integrate into that new persona and that new way of working for them. So that really effective, mirroring other people, modelling other people. The other one, doing it incrementally. I talk about managing the horizon. So the 5-year goal is the horizon. So let's move back. What's your 3-year goal? Where do you want to be by then? What's your 1-year goal? Where do you want to be by then? Okay, what type of people have achieved that in year 1? What do they do? What do they say? How can you then do that? So start at that big picture and then drill down and then start looking at some of the associated. So, okay, this is where we want to be. This is where we are now. How do we get there? What do you need to do? And talk then about development, getting a mentor, doing a training course, getting exposure to something else, tapping into other people, and in a positive, healthy way, using other people as resources. So what's your network? Who can help you do this? Who can help you do that? And then somebody who may be familiar to some of your audience and not others. England Rugby Union Club won the Rugby Union World Cup 20 years ago, sadly now. Not sadly they won it, just sadly it's been that long. Yeah, it's so scary. I remember watching it. And he talked about incrementals, and the Ineos cycling supremo, Dave Brailsford, he talks about incremental changes as well. So if you do 1% better 10 times, that's better than if you across the board, that's better than doing one thing 10% better. So it's making those small steps. And something I thought about earlier on when you were talking about sometimes it's hard just putting your shoes on to go running.
Yeah.
It's also remembering that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or in your running case, begins with a single shoe. And that's also part of what you can do with things like desensitization, gradual exposure. So I've had people in training courses or in meetings where they don't speak, setting them a challenge to speak once in the meeting and then the next month to speak twice in the meeting and work it up gently to start giving them the confidence. As a leader, I started adopting what's called a check-in in some areas, but it's getting everybody to speak straight away. So meetings, go round the table, introduce yourself, what do you want from this meeting? And then people are more prepared to talk, because once they've heard themselves talk, they're more likely to talk. And it stops somebody with the bright idea not speaking at all during the whole meeting and you losing out on what's actually the answer.
No, I think that's a really good idea to get people loosened up almost and get warmed up to hearing their own voice and feeling like, okay, I did say something and nothing bad happened, so I think it's okay. Yeah, very much so. And if you think about it, that's what you do before every session.
that's what interviewers do when they're taking somebody to the interview. If they're any good, they make small talk to put them at ease and to get them relaxed and get them used to being in the public eye or ear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Confucius, when I started looking at the check-in, Confucius talks about the niceties, the pleasantries, and the expressions I've heard that will resonate with some of your past interviewees. But certainly in hospitals, a lot of the surgeons use that technique in surgery before they start, to make sure everybody's focused on the operation, not whoever cut them up on the drive into work or how bad the hospital sandwich was. And apparently the military use it as well. So things like the SEAL teams, things like in the UK, our SAS, use that type of structure before they go out on deployment, because you need the person who's got your back to have your back, not be distracted by something else. So it's a way of making sure you're all on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And, it's really good to hear that, these little small things of just having a little bit of communication up front, talking, getting everybody, communicating is so important. And that's one of those communications, one of those things they call soft skills, but I think they're pretty hard. It's very difficult to do sometimes.
Just a quote, if I may, John, just something pertinent in the UK at the moment. The Body Shop that you might have heard of has just basically gone into administration. So is it Chapter 101 you filed for over there? But and I came across a quote by its founder years ago, Anita Roddick, that for me epitomises doing the small things. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito.
Yeah, I think that's a very good one. That's because you wake up really itchy.
Yeah. And I just love that quote. So incremental works really well, and it builds confidence as you go through. And if you celebrate every success, then it gives you more motivation and drive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that I know a lot of leaders, especially in the software and IT world, struggle with, is celebrating those little successes. It's one of those things where we I don't know, maybe I'm overstating it, but sometimes, but we tend to get into the point where we like to do things a certain way, and we achieve something, and we may celebrate it once, but then when we achieve it again, it becomes, this is what we're supposed to do. This is our norm now, and we don't celebrate those anymore. Yeah, and it's demotivating sometimes.
Every year celebrating it just to keep it fresh, and that's effectively the slot machine effect. You get small wins at irregular intervals that keep you playing. If it stopped reinforcing at all, you'd stop playing quickly. But the fact that it pays out randomly keeps people playing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as leaders we stop paying out. We stop paying out those celebrations. So I think that's important for us to do. John, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for sharing with us so much about the change curve and how people have to deal with their fear and anxiety sometimes going through those things, and how hard change really is. How can people connect with you online and learn more about the things that you're doing, or maybe connect with learn more about C2D?
Yeah, well, as I say, it's as simple as c2d.co.uk. There you'll find a collection of free papers that I've written and presented. You'll find information on my change curve, information on my favourite personality profile, information on me, maybe more than you wanted, and a few booklets and pamphlets and things that I've written. A book called Putting the I into Change, which is a slightly academic overview of tools and techniques that you can use, and then videos of some of the workshops, etc., that I've facilitated. So c2d.co.uk is a good way, John. And thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. It's been a nice chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can click through and get right over to your website. Thanks again, John. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.